on? I'll stand close to you.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Sarah. I'm with the Henry Bernick Entrepreneurship Center, and thank you to those out in the world of YouTube watching us today. We look forward to having Jim Farmilo, who's the VP and General Manager of ISO Water here in Collingwood. He's been involved in a number of startups and small businesses, and we're really pleased to have this opportunity to hear from Jim and have this local talent share his expertise with us. So, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, Sarah asked me to give a little bit of background about my startup in business and the various businesses. I've actually been involved with a number of them over the years. I'm a really old guy. And I think the first thing, I started off in science. I graduated in Edmonton from math and physics program and then moved down to Toronto and did cancer research in Princess Margaret Hospital for a number of years. And when I did a postdoc in London, Ontario, I spent probably almost a year making a pair of antibodies that I needed to do my research that took about 2 months. And it occurred to me at that point that, first of all, I wasn't such a great researcher after all, that I was a little too impatient for it. But also, if somebody took charge of making products for researchers, then they could accomplish a lot more quickly and generally increase the speed of development and understanding in cancer research. So with another partner, I set out and we decided to start a company to make reagents, make products for cancer research primarily, in immunology research. So how do you get started? You're coming out of a university. It's not like you've got a lot of money behind you. And one of the things that I learned in retrospect is that probably we were a little more entrepreneurial than I even realized at the time, because we had no money. We wanted to start a company. We realized that in order to do so and to create the products that we needed over $20,000 worth of equipment, which back in 1975 was a lot of money. And so how do you go about doing it? Well, we came to the brilliant conclusion that every university and every hospital has something called the room. And the room is the place where all of the equipment that they don't use anymore for research projects, for people that have moved on, or projects that have stopped, gets dumped. So the two of us went around for about 3-4 months almost. We visited U of T, we visited Princess Margaret, that we knew, of course, Western Ontario Hospital there. And we went in and said, okay, we'll catalog everything in the room. And we'll make 3 piles. One pile is the good stuff that you should keep, one pile is garbage, and the third pile is stuff we want to take. And so after about a 3.5 month period, we had over $20,000 worth of lab equipment to set up our lab and set up our company. And this is one of the interesting things about people like yourselves that are interested in starting, is that you have innovative ideas about how to get things accomplished. And always look and think outside the box, because this gave us a start, gave us a balance sheet for the next step of our business. And once we started that business, we ran that business for I guess, about 9 years, 8 years. And then in the usual sort of course of events, the 2 partners had issues, and we decided the best way to do it was to split up the business into 2 different divisions, if you like. And I took the one that was, at that point I was getting more and more interested in cancer diagnosis, so I took the section that was related to that and started a second company, Dimension Laboratories. And our focus there was on tissue pathology, testing cancer tissue for using antibodies for different methods of detection. So we developed a number of products for that, and also for transplantation, which was one of our big successes. Actually, was a reagent that matched donors and recipients for transplants. So with that business, we again went for about another 8 or 9 years, and the exit strategy, if you like, for that, aside from my own inclination, was to sell off that business to another company. In the meantime, we'd also been involved with some cosmetics, so we started 2 companies actually that were selling cosmetics, one called Nissim, which is still operational, and another one which is kind of struggling along at the moment. We also started a veterinary product company in the US, And that's why I can talk about funding, because we were grossly underfunded for that operation. And we learned a lot about the requirements and the necessity of having a clear idea of what you need to achieve what you want to do with available funding. So that after the sale of the company to the Danish company, I took over a section of the Danish company in Denmark for about 5 years that was, I called it entrepreneurial, even though it was a big company, because it was what I called the orphan products division. It was stuff nobody knew what to do with. And so we had a team of maybe, I don't know, 35 people around the world that were selling these products to other drug and diagnostic companies. That company was taken over by venture capitalists, which I'll talk a little bit about, and decided that our philosophies didn't quite mesh, and so I asked to move back to Canada and retired, and that was one of the things that I failed at most miserably, was retirement. So now I'm back working with Andrew Stewart and ISO Water Corporation, and we're now selling heavy water deuterium oxide for use in applications outside the nuclear industry, so making cell phone chips, optical fiber cables, new drugs, all kinds of new and interesting therapeutic and diagnostics. So I'm back into the medicine a little bit. So that's kind of my history. I love companies, I love startups. When they get to be about 10, 12 people, generally speaking, that's when I get the feeling that I have to move on and do something a little different. So with that varied and strange background, what I'd like to do is just sort of go over a list of different options for funding and tell you a little bit about my experience, and it's all street experience. You know, I did take some marketing courses when I was in Denmark, and I took a lot of courses. Initially there was the Federal Business Development Bank, FBDB. They ran a lot of courses for small companies, for entrepreneurs, and I took most of their finance courses and some of their sales and marketing courses, and it was extremely helpful to give you enough of a founding to at least understand what you're doing. And I think you'll find out as you get out there that as an entrepreneur you have skills, you identify those skills, and then you find other people who are better than you are at the things that you can't do very well. And that's really important, but you do still have to understand the fundamentals of finance and marketing, everything else, but you depend on the people that you hire or act as advisors to give you the advice. You just choose which advice to take and what to follow, but definitely you need to seek out support for those areas that you're not so strong at. And this is something that probably is not new to any of you that have been in an entrepreneurship course about ways of getting money. But I will, as I say, it's an experience-based discussion, so I'll talk a little about it. Once we had found our supplies and decided that we really wanted to start a business, we sat down and made a business plan. And the first person I contacted was my father. And I said, Dad, I've got a business plan, I've got an idea. We need to borrow $15,000 to get it going. And he was in the oil business, so I still remember this discussion very clearly, because his first question is, well, what are you going to do with the 15 million? I said, 1,000, Dad, 1,000. So we had a little further discussion, then he said, okay, so how fast can you pay back the 15 million? 1,000, Dad, 1,000. Reset his thinking there. But what he did, he gave us the advice, and the other thing he did, more important than anything else, is he gave me an introduction. Gave me an introduction to the local CIBC bank manager, and through his contacts. And any of these guys, any of these people that you approach as investors, if you have the opportunity, it's far better to have an introduction to them by somebody that's their friend or associate that they trust. However you can make that connection. You'll get in the door and get further a lot faster if you can go that kind of route. So family and friends, yeah, sure. We didn't take the money from the family, we took the advice from the family. For all I know, my father maybe in the background said, look, if this guy totally blows it, I'll cover whatever losses they have, but they did loan us the $15,000, so we got off the ground. I want to say a little bit about crowdfunding, and I have zero experience with this, so you have to accept what I say as being mostly my sense of it. But there are different methods of crowdfunding, and it's quite popular nowadays, obviously. There are basically two types as I understand it. One is the all or nothing. So you have a project, you have a plan, you lay this out, put it out there. If you make your whatever cutoff is, $15,000, $20,000, $200,000, then the plan goes ahead. If you don't, it doesn't. So that's one, and it's fairly comfortable for investors because if the plan doesn't go ahead, they get basically their money back. The other is keep what you get, which is a little more risky, I guess, for the investor, and that is that as much as you get, if you don't quite make it, you still keep it. I honestly am not sure how that would work, because ideally if you have a plan ahead of time and you don't get enough money to do it, you're still in the same boat you were in when you started, and now you've got a lot of other people involved. There's several other things about the investors. One is you can offer them a reward. Sometimes, you know, for people that take up products very quickly, they love to get in on beta testing, for example. You can offer them product once your project comes to fruition. You can offer them discounts. You can also offer them equity. And one of the things generally that I will say about equity is, number one, you don't want to do it too soon because your company isn't worth very much, so you give away a lot for very little. And secondly, if you get equity from 1,000 different investors from crowdfunding, it becomes a lot more difficult further down the line if you now decide you want a major investor, because our experience with the Danish company was that all of us had shares in the company. But fortunately for the lawyer at the Danish company, they had made us sign a share agreement that said that if there was an offer from an investor that was accepted by the company owners, we had to sell the shares 100%. So, because the last thing a big investor wants is to have to deal with multiple minority investors. So be very careful if you're giving out equity. And I'll say the same thing in another regard. One way of funding your company is to give out equity to people who provide services. Also very dangerous, because if your time is extended, you wind up giving away far more equity than you thought you would. And at the end of the day, you know, you've got another owner, another partner, and you don't really have a lot to show for it. Advice, if you can do it, is give away equity for investment only, but not for services. Bank loans, as we did, that was the step we took next. And it's interesting, again, you need, and I'll talk a little bit later about how to deal with the banks and deal with investors, but basically you make up your business plan, you go in and you present your plan to the bank manager. I took the brilliant step of making up what I thought was a really good business plan, and at the end of the presentation he looked at me and he said, you know, why are you here? He said, you've got this business plan, you're going to borrow $15,000, you're going to pay it back in 6 months, it's not worth my while to process the loan. So the key there, that I learned very quickly, was you got to understand who you're talking to and what they want out of the deal. The bank wants long-term, you know, a company, a relationship, long-term, that they can work with over the years. And so I very quickly changed my tack and said, you know, well, it may not come to pass quite that quick, you know, and then we've got a problem. And secondly, I said, what else can you do? So then he got into the whole thing and he started talking about, well, we can do operating lines, we can do export services, we can do this, that, whatever else. And at the end of the day, I realized that this guy was trying to sell me on dealing with that bank. So I said, you know, is this any different, or am I going to get something from another bank? Oh, no, you know, we can do anything anybody can do. He wound up selling me to go to the bank, and at the same time was convincing himself how our business fit with his services. So it was kind of a double sale, if you like, both of us going in either other direction. Generally speaking, my experience is that with the term loans, you do this with a project that has a definitive objective and a definitive time. So you know you want to buy this piece of equipment to produce this product. You take a term loan, you buy the equipment, you pay it off with the results of producing your product. If you're just going to use it for sort of general purposes, I call it, for maybe covering over expenses or taking advantage of an opportunity, if you get a chance to buy 10,000 bottles at 50% off, and you know you're going to use them over the next 3 years, use your operating line for that kind of thing, because it's a longer term proposition. And that's pretty much what I have to say about that. Internally generated funding is an interesting option, and it sounds obvious, I suppose, but in 2 of the companies that we did, we had a line of products that generated cash. Our business originally the first business and second business were involved in developing new products. Very expensive proposition, time consuming. So what we did was we took on a compatible line of products from Denmark that we could distribute to generate cash. So it was product in, product out the door, that kind of thing. So we generated a lot of cash from that and then used that cash to fund the development part of the business. And that's a pretty good way of doing it if you can set it up that way, if you have that kind of option. Government involvement, I call that, it's a wide range of things. It can be grants, it can be loans, there's a whole spectrum of things. And Sarah was saying a little bit about, before this meeting, what kinds of options were available. Again, one thing for sure is if you're an entrepreneur, is you have to be very careful at accepting free money. And the issue that we've found with most government grants and most government loans is that it involves a lot of paperwork. And this is what I have to say about almost all of these things, is there's a cost to all of this stuff. You're using somebody else's money. Interest is the obvious cost. But equity is another cost if you deal with that. But also the cost is your time. And you really have to be careful because we had a huge grant and it involved a lot of time. And I would say probably 20% of my time was involved in managing this grant. And I mean, thank goodness, because it's taxpayers' money, right? So I'm glad they were looking after it. But it does involve a lot of time. So you have to balance that and understand for sure that the reporting requirements, some of them, like this is, I'm in a science-based business, so for us, the government grants are intended to increase jobs and leverage private money. So we have to report for 5 years after the end of the grant, every year, what we've done with that kind of thing. So just be sure when you go in there that you understand completely what kind of reporting you're going to have to do, what kind of monitoring you're going to have to do, how you're going to have to keep your records, because we used Industrial Research Assistance Program, one of the best programs out there that we've found in terms of achieving its objectives. But again, you have to keep all of your expenses related to that project separate. So it's a little bit of an accounting issue if you're a small business. Sometimes you can get loans. There are quite a few of those out there. Some of them are forgivable, especially for small businesses or for other categories of things. There can also be a delayed payment. We're looking at one now that has a loan where you just pay interest for the first year and a half, and then you pay everything off in the next year and a half, assuming, of course, that now you've got your product out there and are able to do that. So there's all kinds of options. The other thing about government loans, which is fairly important, is that you have to understand the timing for them may not suit the timing that you need, and this is something, again, you have to be careful of. We've gone out and looked for grants for specific projects, and they say, yeah, great, your company fits, and you fill out the application form and say, yeah, but it's not funded yet. And then you wait for 6 months or 7 months or 10 months until it gets funded. And by then, maybe as a business, your opportunity could well have passed. So again, the people in the IRAP, for example, who we use as kind of a source of information, will certainly tell you that this project or that project will take a period of time before you can get your money and get it forward. If you're a smaller business, there's lots of programs out there that are far faster and less onerous, and I think that's the whole intent of them. But from a government loan perspective, I had somebody advise me and said, never build your business around government money over a long time. Use it for an objective, use it for a short-term objective, and then move on. I mean, you can repeat it if you like, but at least be sure that you're not basing all of your income of your business or half of your income on government funding, because it can be pulled, of course, and eventually you're going to still have to stand on your own 2 feet. The one thing that the government and IRAP in particular can do very well is networking, and they can put you in touch with people. As Sarah said, they know people that have money, they know people that are willing to do investments. The IRAP folks could put us in touch with universities and other companies that could do some of the work that we couldn't manage to do on our own. They can set you up with meetings with different government departments, give you contacts. All of these things are very valuable if you're moving your business forward. At the end of the day, if you need probably more money than you can get from these other sources, or for whatever reason you can, you have to take on the idea of shareholders and angel investors, or venture capitalists, or other shareholders, third-party shareholders, if you like, that are not friends and family, that kind of thing, as a source of money. Angel investors, generally speaking, are individuals that are investing their own money, sort of like the Dragon's Den kind of thing. They, they have a group of friends or associates or themselves, and they look at your project and decide if they're prepared to make the investment. Generally speaking, they want a good chunk of it, and if you've watched Dragon's Den at all, you've seen that they're offering, they're looking for 20, 30, 50% in many cases. So you have to understand that and understand what you're prepared to give up if you're going to ask for that kind of money. Venture capitalists are also the same. The other thing that they want out of it, of course, is return on investment. So if you're approaching those investors, you definitely have to have a growth story. You have to have a track record, and you have to have a growth story, because that's what they're looking for to a great extent in their investment. Other shareholders, we have in our company now, we have a number of shareholders that have invested money in the stock of the company. Again, it's a time-consuming business for shareholder management. So, I certainly, if you want it, if you need it, if you can get more out of it than even just the money through advice or through experience of these shareholders, that's great. But it does take time, and there are certain regulations involved with it as well once you get above a small business size. So how do you go about it? Well, I've alluded to it a little bit, I guess, in a few cases. Obviously, you have to decide how much you need. Decides what you want to do. So the initial part, of course, is to figure out exactly what your plan is and how you're going to use the money. That's probably the most important thing. That'll tell you what range of investor or range of source of funds that you can go after. If you need $5,000 to do a marketing campaign, if you need $20,000 to buy a piece of equipment, if you need $100,000 to start exporting overseas, those are all different categories of approach that you have to make, and it could be different sources of funding, obviously. When you're talking about things like export, if you're talking about production, that's when the government grants really start to pull weight, because those are the kind of things that they look for in most of their offerings, is increase in jobs, increasing income and leverage of their private funding. Larger amounts of money, generally speaking, are looking at more along the lines of the investors. And however, there are government grants such as the Sustainable Technology Development Corporation, STDC, that will provide for large amounts of funding for specific applications. So if you happen to fit one of those, and IT is definitely a strong point these days, science certainly is a strong point, clean energy is a strong point, then these kinds of organizations can provide funding in the millions of dollars, actually, if you've got a project that is sufficiently good to interest them in that. When you go to the investor, and I don't care whether it's your family or whether it's a venture capitalist, the degree of information you have to provide is different, but the kind of information is the same. And always remember, when you're going into an investor, that it's a sales job, basically. You're selling not only your company, but more importantly, you're selling yourself. If you go in to borrow some money, as we did in the first step with $15,000, we had some assets, which I told you how we managed to get those. But in reality, there was very little that the bank could use to support that loan. They were betting on us and as individuals and saying, yeah, these people look like they're going to be able to pull it off. And how do you convince them to do that? Well, you do it with a clear plan. You do it with an understanding of your market. So who are you selling to? How are you going to sell to them? What other companies are in that business? Are there any companies that are selling similar products? If you've got a brand new product, it's a little hard to prove your market. So you take a look at something that's related or similar and say, okay, this is the group of people that they're selling to. We can follow that lead. Always look around and see who is succeeding, if you can do that, and how they're doing it, and get some ideas from that as well. The presentation has to be fairly thorough, and if you're going after angel investors or venture capitalists, it has to be extremely thorough. For the bank, their main interest is in long-term relationships. So there you can do the presentation, you can do your plan, you can do your selling of yourself as a competent person able to pull this all off, and that's perfectly fine for them. If you're looking for if they're looking for an investor that's interested in growth, you have to know a lot more about it, and I think that's a later development, later stage for most small businesses. Selling your proposal, like I say, it's mostly about you and the fact that you know what you're doing, you know your product, you know your market, and you have a plan that will allow you to get to where you have to be in order to succeed, to fulfill the needs of your investor, your person loaning you money, and also, of course, your own. So I think that's kind of an outline summary. I don't know, Sarah, do you have?
We have some questions for sure. Does anyone in the room have any questions yet that they thought of? No? Okay, I'll try to speak loudly so that you can hear me. If you could just, because we have different audiences of students and startups and entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized business owners, perhaps if you are interested in sharing what the advantages are of a loan and grant for funding.
Okay. The loan obviously is something you're paying back. A grant is something you're not. And I think the advantages of a loan is that it's understood, easily understood, it's controllable. If you can have a plan that generates enough capital, enough money to pay it back, to carry out your activity, a loan is the least time-consuming thing that you could possibly do. It obviously depends on having enough of a plan and enough of a result to pay it back, but that's really the only risk. With a grant, the money is available. You don't have to pay it back, obviously, so that's a big advantage. The disadvantage, as I said, generally speaking, is timing. Can you get it when you need it? And the second thing is, what do you have to do to in order to get it in the first place? You obviously have to do applications, and some of those can be pretty time-consuming. If you have a good plan, generally speaking, the applications follow a business plan model. So they'll ask you about your market, they'll ask you about your competitors. If you've got all that already, it's not such a big deal, but that's the advantage.
You had mentioned shareholders in your presentation. Can you describe what size of a company you need to have before you can have shareholders?
Right. I mean, you can start right off the bat. I guess if I look at it from one way, I had a partner in the very first company, and you could, in a sense, call him a shareholder, I guess. But really speaking of the broader shareholder base, you're dealing with a range of people that have their own objectives in what they want out of this investment. And you somehow got to manage all of that. Some of them are interested in a fairly short time turnaround. Some of them are fine to leave their money in for a long period of time. Some of them are interested in growth. Some of them are more interested in the income. So when you get a mix like that, it does take time to manage all of that information. The one thing that I can say from my experience, is that where we have had shareholders of various sorts, providing them with regular information is really helpful. It stops a lot of problems and a lot of questions. So, certainly promote the things that succeed and you're doing right. Don't be afraid too much to talk to them about things that are wrong, as long as you have a way of dealing with it. So, come if you have to say that sales fell by 10%, 20% in this quarter, it's because of whatever, and this is what I'm doing to change and turn it around in the next quarter. But it does take management time, and so the broad answer to the question, I guess, is if you're big enough to have somebody that has the time, or hire somebody to do it, that's worth doing.
That's great.
Cool. How would you describe entrepreneurship?
Okay. How would I describe entrepreneurship? Well, characteristics, I think probably you guys all know pretty well. I mean, I find innovation or new ideas is key. Flexibility is key. One of the things that has made our small businesses successful in a market like medical diagnostics, where there's huge, massive companies, is flexibility. And focus on the customer is probably one of the strongest things that I can suggest for you as a small company, particularly entrepreneur. Know your customers really well and tailor your products as much as you can to suit those customers. Even if they have different needs, you have to kind of follow. So flexibility, innovation, persistence, for sure. There's going to be tough times. I was told by somebody when I started that it would be 5 years before I didn't panic every time a month was low, and they were about right. And a work ethic, good work ethic, and passion. And those two things I link together, because if you have a passion for your product, a passion for your idea, then the work ethic will follow you. You want to do it. It's not like you're going to work every day. It's you're doing what you really enjoy. And entrepreneurship, I guess, to me, is a tool. It's a method. It's a tool. It's a tool to allow you to decide what your life payment or your life currency is. For example, somebody that is interested in counting money, gaining money, building a big asset base, whatever, that's fine. For me, it was very different, because I was, I guess, much more foolish in some ways. I mean, I went into the business because I wanted to provide inexpensive, or at least high value, let's put it that way, reagents for research in order to advance diagnostics. It was something I was interested in. I'm not wealthy. I've had a very good life. I'm reasonably well off. And I've been in businesses that have helped a lot of people, and I know that, including me. I mean, the irony of the thing is that a number of years ago, I had prostate cancer, and it was diagnosed by a test that I had helped work on, a technologist that I trained. So you never know, what goes around comes around, and so, my currency, I guess, in my life is this feeling of being helpful, of being useful. And whatever your currency is, if you acknowledge that and understand it, then you can move towards it. And entrepreneurship is the tool that allows you to choose that path. And I think you said it earlier that, I hate working for somebody else. I have worked for other people. Yes, that's right. I have worked for other people. I am working for somebody else now, but most of my life, and in fact, all of my jobs have been very independent ones, and that allows me to get that kind of currency out of it.
That's a great answer.
Sorry to be philosophical,
No,
but it's a lot of years that I put into this, and I really do feel strongly that it's a path that people could take.
I know at Georgian College we're focusing a lot on what we can bring to the table in terms of a social impact, so I think that your answer resonates well with a lot of the students and faculty. So
Yeah.
You mentioned working at ISO Water, which is a local company here in Collingwood. How many other people are working there right now?
We have about 10. Actually, it's an interesting organization, because especially when we started off, we weren't all in the same place. We had some people in Toronto, some in Montreal, some up in Chalk River, and some obviously in Collingwood. We're located here because we live here.
Okay.
And the fact is that when I moved back from Denmark, I was doing OEM business worldwide, and I realized that when we moved up to Clarksburg, to Blue Mountains there, I could do my same business from the whole house because of all this technology that's available to us. In the old days, we had to go visit our customers 4 times a year or 6 times a year or whatever it was. And by the time I stopped doing that business, it was all done on the internet or phone, and we visited once a year for a business review meeting.
Yeah.
And so from Clarksburg, I could sit here and deal with companies all around the world. It was really an opportunity, and I guess you guys know it better than I do, but that's, it can be almost a virtual company. There are virtual companies out there, in fact. So, so the 10 people there, as I say, we're selling into a lot of different markets, and it's a very, very interesting business, and it will bring more jobs here, hopefully, as we're successful.
That's what we hope. I guess that's my perfect lead into my last question, and that's on behalf of the students, co-op students and new graduates, just a question about if you were adding to your team or if you're hiring a co-op or a new grad, what are you looking for in terms of a skill set? So what can they do while they're here to make sure that they're hireable by an innovative company like yours?
I think
when you work
one thing you learn is that you need a strong base of theory, a strong base of understanding about whatever type of job you're looking for, what type of business you're in. But every single job, every single company will require additional training and learning. So the strongest thing that you can do is to understand how to learn, how to pick up things quickly, have a steep learning curve, so that you can integrate yourself into the organization. We do use co-op students from a number of different places. We've had some from Waterloo. We've had some, I don't think we've had any from Georgian College that I'm aware of yet, but I know we're
soon to change.
This will change. So we've had University of Toronto engineering, PEY students, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, obviously a good work ethic, but also that ability to learn quickly and to grasp things as fast as they possibly can. If you're on a 2 or 3 month co-op type program, obviously it's nice to get up to speed. If the company's smart, and this is as much the company as it is the student actually, or the co-op, because if the company is smart, we've learned that we define projects that are achievable within the time period that the person is there, and don't put them on something that's a 4-year project, and unless there's a sort of a discrete element they can put into it. 2 reasons. One is that gives the company a result out of this, which is positive experience. More importantly, it gives a positive experience to the student, because they can say, I did this, I achieved this, and it was helpful, and sure, it fit into a bigger picture maybe, but it's still something that they did. And I think that's probably one of the most important things for co-op.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions in the room? No? Okay. I just, on behalf of the Henry Bernick Entrepreneurship Center and the Georgian College South Georgian Bay campus and all of the other 6 campuses that we're broadcasting to, I just wanted to say thank you. We don't do swag at Georgian anymore, so you won't be getting a Georgian mug, but what we do is we make a donation to a student scholarship in your name.
Oh, excellent.
And that's just a token to say thank you and to help students that may not have the same accessibility to come here. So we look forward to having those students attend.
Great. Well,
Yeah,
that's
so
really nice.
thank you
that's
so
a
much
good
for your
thing to
time.
do. Yeah, no, I think it's that's a good, and thank you for asking me, because I know I'm get a little pedantic sometimes, but you know what? I'm passionate about this. It really
Yeah,
is
you can
something
tell.
that's worthwhile.
That's good. Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.